For 3,000 years, a secret has been hidden, deliberately erased from holy texts, feared by theologians, and buried by religious councils. What if I told you that angels weren't the only divine beings watching humanity? That there existed immortal entities, neither fully angelic nor demonic, beings who risked everything because they could not resist the beauty of human existence? These were not fallen angels like Lucifer, cast out in rebellion. They were something far more unsettling. Divine watchers who chose to descend, who traded eternity for desire, and whose punishment was not death, but endless, conscious imprisonment. This is the story that Genesis only dares to hint at when it says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair." But the ancient Book of Enoch speaks plainly, where canonical texts fall silent. Today we uncover what heaven tried to erase, the watchers who taught humanity forbidden knowledge, whose offspring became giants, and whose influence may still be felt in our world. The divine observers, original purpose. Before their fall, before their names became whispers, the watchers served a sacred purpose. They were not created as angels in the traditional sense. They were something different, divine sentinels, positioned between heaven and earth. In ancient texts, they were called Gregori, meaning those who do not sleep. Eternal observers whose eyes never closed. They stood in the high places of the earth, on mountaintops, in storm clouds, at the boundaries where the mortal and divine worlds brushed against each other. The Book of Chronicles hints at their purpose. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. The Watchers fulfilled this role. They were the very eyes of God, sent to witness humanity's journey without interference. They carried no weapons. They passed no judgments. Their authority was not to punish, but simply to observe and record. Silent, tireless witnesses to the unfolding human story. For countless ages, they maintained their vigil, watching civilizations rise and fall, observing human triumphs and tragedies from their lofty positions. Always watching, never touching, until something changed, the descent and the fall. What happens when immortal beings who were never meant to feel desire suddenly find themselves captivated by mortal beauty? What happens when eternity itself grows lonely? The Book of Enoch tells us that 200 watchers, led by their chief, Samjaza, gathered on Mount Hermon and made a fateful pact. Samjaza feared bearing punishment alone, so they bound themselves together with mutual oaths. "You were in heaven," God later told them through Enoch, "and not all mysteries were open to you, but you chose the hearts of women." Their descent was not violent. It was not a war against heaven. It was something perhaps more profound, a rebellion born of longing, of wonder, of the desire to experience rather than merely observe. The eyes of God blinked just once, and the watchers fell not with a roar, but with a whisper. What followed changed human history forever. The forbidden knowledge, the union between watchers and humans produced more than love. It produced knowledge, secrets of heaven that mortals were never meant to possess. Azazel taught the crafting of weapons, swords, shields, knives of iron and fire. With his knowledge came unprecedented bloodshed, as brother learned to kill brother not with stones, but with forged steel. Samjaza unveiled enchantments, spells, and incantations that bent unseen forces to human will. Armoros taught the resolving of spells. Barakage revealed astrology. Kokobel mapped the constellations. Penui opened human eyes to secret writings. Women learned what Enoch calls beautification, the adornment of the body, the painting of faces, the arts of seduction that transformed human attraction. Perhaps most disturbing of all, according to Enoch, they taught the knowledge of death, including how to strike the embryo in the womb. Life itself could now be interrupted before it began. These were not merely skills or technologies. They were divine powers given to beings unprepared to wield them responsibly. Half-truths, as Enoch calls them, divine power without divine wisdom. And what could be more dangerous? The Nephilim and the corruption. From the union of watchers and humans came offspring, the Nephilim, giants of immense power and insatiable appetite. Genesis 6 briefly acknowledges them as mighty men of old, men of renown, but Enoch reveals their darker nature. These were not heroes. They were monsters whose hunger knew no bounds. They devoured the land, the animals, and eventually turned on humanity itself. Their violence and corruption spread until, as Genesis puts it, the thoughts of men were only evil continually. Enoch writes, the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Nature itself rebelled against their presence. The blood cried out from the soil. The stars turned their faces. Heaven's patience finally expired. The Nephilim would be destroyed in the coming flood. But what of the immortal watchers who could not die? Their punishment would be far worse than death. The divine imprisonment, death would have been mercy. Instead, the watchers received immortality as punishment, eternal consciousness trapped in darkness. Enoch 10:4 describes their fate in chilling detail. Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert and cast him in. Fill it with rough and jagged rocks. This was Dudael, not hell, not Sheol, but something older and more terrible. A prison carved by divine command into the bones of the earth, somewhere beneath mountains scorched by celestial flame. There, the watchers were buried alive, conscious, burning, for what Enoch calls 70 generations. Not annihilated, but preserved in torment. Not erased, but remembered in pain. Some were cast into darkness and covered with stones. Others were sealed beneath rivers or mountains. Some were suspended in what Enoch calls the abyss, the chaotic void beneath creation, where light has no memory. And yet, the book hints at a darker truth, that not all watchers remained bound. Some were released before their time. Some were allowed to walk the earth once more, diminished, veiled, changed, but not broken. The wandering spirits. While the watchers remained imprisoned, their children met a different fate. The Nephilim perished in the flood, but being half divine, their spirits could not truly die. From them, Enoch says, came something darker. The spirits of the giants shall afflict, oppress, destroy, attack. They shall corrupt, lead astray, and bruise upon the earth. These weren't demons born of hell. They were orphans of heaven and earth, disembodied, restless, angry. They became the tormentors of mankind, wandering the spaces between the physical and spiritual realms. This revelation changes our understanding of spiritual warfare. The entities that trouble humanity aren't simply Satan's fallen angels. They're the orphaned children of divine beings who loved too recklessly and taught too freely. Why the story was buried? Why was the Book of Enoch, once read alongside the Law and the Prophets, directly quoted by New Testament authors like Jude, suddenly cast out of the canon? Not because it was false, but because it was too true. This story threatens established doctrine. It introduces divine complexity where tradition demands simplicity. It tells us that some heavenly beings crossed forbidden lines without being annihilated, that not every being cast out of heaven was a devil. Some were simply mourned. It suggests that the line between holy and fallen is thinner than we've been taught. That sacred knowledge was not stolen by Satan, but given by divine beings once loyal to heaven. Perhaps most troubling of all, it hints that these beings might return, that some already have. Not to rule, not to rebel, but to remind us that we were not the first to fall short of glory, and we will not be the last. So the councils hid the book, the scribes burned the scrolls, the teachers called it myth, and the world moved on, forgetting the fire that once fell from the stars. But heaven never forgets, and the imprisoned never stop watching. Signs of their return. Enoch was not only a witness, he was a prophet. What he saw wasn't limited to the past. He spoke of a time when the sky would fracture, when the imprisoned would stir, and the ancient ones would rise again. Behold, he comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, says Enoch 1 verse 9, words echoed verbatim in Jude 1 verse 14. But who are these holy ones? Not all angels, not all saints. Some, Enoch implies, were once watchers. The judgment they witnessed was not only for them, it was also for us, for the world they left behind is the one we now walk. Look around. The knowledge they gave, once drowned in the flood, has begun to rise again. We see it in our obsession with forbidden technologies, in the manipulation of life itself through gene editing and artificial intelligence, in the merging of flesh and machine. Knowledge once thought mythical now returns under the name of science. We hear it in the whispers from children who speak of stars they've never seen, in the voices that call from mountains, deserts, and abandoned temples, voices that do not belong to this world but seem too old to ignore. The Book of Daniel speaks of a final kingdom, one that mixes iron and clay, technology and flesh, power and fragility. Could it be the same fusion the Watchers once began? Could we be building once again what heaven once tore down? Conclusion: the veil is thinning. The story of the Watchers was never meant to be lost forever. It was buried until the world became like theirs once more, until our arrogance returned, until our knowledge outgrew our wisdom, until our hearts chased what heaven once silenced. That time is now. The ancient prison groans. The veil between worlds grows thin. What was hidden begins to reveal itself again. You were never alone in this world, but you were never the only ones watching. The eyes that have witnessed the entirety of human history, from Eden to empires, from flood to fire, remain open. Some still burn in chains beneath the earth. Others walk among us, their fire dimmed but not extinguished, their faces aged by time, but their eyes untouched by death. The question isn't whether the Watchers exist. The question is whether we'll recognize them when they return, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as witnesses to what we've become. For 3,000 years, heaven tried to bury this story. Perhaps it's time we asked ourselves why it's resurfacing now. The Watchers are still watching, and maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for us to remember what they were never allowed to forget.